Hi, I'm Stephen O'Grady, co-founder of RedMonk, and we're here for another RedMonk conversation. And I'm here with Eric. Eric, can you introduce yourself for us?
Sure. Hi, I'm Eric Sorenson. I'm a product manager at Puppet, and I'm working on a new project that we're working on called Relay.
Awesome. Yeah. So the interesting part about Relay to me is that, what we here at RedMonk, for those who are unfamiliar with us, we, talk, from the practitioner viewpoint. And one of the things we hear from practitioners, be they developers, operators, sysadmins, whomever, is that they're dealing with more and more and more different moving pieces, right? It used to be, certainly back in the olden days, the architectures were not terribly complicated. We had a sort of a more limited sort of set of moving parts. And you look around the enterprise today, and what you find are really technically sophisticated architectures. They can do some wonderful and some amazing things. But as I said, the fragmentation is sort of rampant, right? There's a ton of moving parts. There's a ton of moving pieces. And all of this is essentially making sort of life more difficult. So what we're seeing, at least from our perspective, our enterprises are looking for, as they should be, in our view, ways to tackle this via automation, right? To take in, sort of a bunch of these disparate services, products, sort of call them what you will, and stitch them together in a reliable, repeatable way, to basically make sense, sort of this essentially patchwork quilt of different products and services. So does that jive with sort of your view of the market, and certainly what you folks are trying to do, on the Relay front?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that one of the interesting characteristics that we've been hearing from our users and customers is that while there are APIs for most of the services that they have to work with, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're all easy to integrate with one another. Right. And in fact, some of the services that you might think would be easy to automate are kind of resistant to automation because the API doesn't handle everything, or you have to manipulate data in a particular way to make it work right. And so although there may be parts of the infrastructure that are well automated, stitching them together can be a nightmare unto itself.
Yeah, and particularly doing that at scale, right? So in other words, it's one thing, again, if you have to sort of integrate with a couple of APIs, okay, you might be able to manage that, even on a sort of sustainable basis moving forward. But I mean, I have to imagine that from a Puppet standpoint, a lot of the folks that you're dealing with are dealing with this at scale, right? This isn't one or two or a couple services; it's a lot of them.
Yeah, there's a combination too of technical scale, that is the scope of the different kinds of things that are trying to automate, as well as the concept of organizational scale. That is that the teams that need to work together and the skill levels amongst those teams are pretty disparate. Plus the
Right.
organizational complexity can kind of throw a monkey wrench into the automation that may exist in pockets, but it's difficult to spread it across that organization.
Yeah, for sure. So, when, at RedMonk, when we talk to enterprises, we talk to developers, right? And when we talk to them about sort of the reasons to sort of look at, solving a particular problem or, sort of addressing an issue, a lot of it comes down to trying to understand, sort of carrot and stick, right? What's the downside and what's the upside, to, again, sort of attacking, sort of a problem, perceived or otherwise. And in this particular case, really what we see, the downsides of essentially not trying to manage this, sort of in a, sort of automated, sort of sensible fashion, are they're pretty bad, right? In the sense that, what we're looking at are increased failure rates, people getting sort of paged in the middle of the night. In a best case scenario, you're talking about sort of a higher latency manual process, which is, frankly, just slower. And, sort of conversely, I mean, obviously it sounds like sort of, I don't know, sort of an ideal or platonic situation, right? But the sort of inverse of this is, a real sort of stark night and day difference, in the sense that, when we see people sort of moving to automate all these pieces, what we end up finding are, organizations that are able to move more quickly, right? Because they're not relying on sort of, cumbersome, tedious manual processes, to make all of this work. But more than that, they're dealing with sort of lower defect and failure rates, because, when you can, sort of apply automation, and not in every case, of course, but in a lot of cases, you're sort of decreasing the chances of introducing human error, right? So, when you talk to customers sort of about the problem, when you talk to them, what are the kinds of things that, you talk to either as incentives or, on the sort of flip side of that coin, the problems if they don't, solve this?
Yeah, well, everything that you just said for sure. And one additional thing that we've heard pretty frequently is that the automation, again, may exist in pockets. There may be certain people that are the go-to people to fix a particular problem, but that knowledge tends to be isolated or insular, and it's tribal knowledge rather than something that is codified in tools and in repeatable processes. And so one of the things that we're really interested in is this concept of democratizing that automation and making so it's not just sort of the high priests and priestesses that are the people that you need to go to get a particular problem solved, but that across the organization, people can come in and with a lower level of intimate knowledge of how the systems work or how to run a particular script or how to solve a particular recurring problem, that more people can log in and get access to the automation that's going to solve the problem. And that goes directly to your point about reducing that time to failure.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
right.
reducing the time to restoral from a failure.
Restore, right? Yeah. Sort of on a related note, just to sort of make this sort of more concrete, I guess. From a customer standpoint, right? So, what are some examples of customers that you see that are solving this problem? And then sort of more specifically within them, like what kinds of services are they connecting? What are the particulars, of, the automation that they're applying to, sort of these various, sort of cloud services? Like, what are they doing?
Sure. So I'll take a really concrete example because I spoke with them earlier this week. There's a managed service provider called Brix that's based out of Belgium that are using Relay to auto scale in response to alerting events. They manage infrastructure for their customers, and they load all of the telemetry data into Grafana. They have Grafana set up to send out alerts, and previously they had to respond to those alerts by running scripts because the type of auto scaling that they need to do spans just a single cloud provider. So they can't just use, say, the AWS built-in auto scaling because there are pieces outside of that infrastructure that also need to respond to requests for greater resources. And so we built a Grafana integration with them that has two different parts. One of them is that Relay receives a webhook from Grafana when one of these alert thresholds is triggered. They were able to pull together a workflow that coordinates actions across all the different pieces of the infrastructure that need to change. And then we post back into Grafana an annotation that shows up in those same dashboards that generated the alert saying that we ran a workflow and here were the changes that were made. And so that's sort of two-way communication and completing that circle through the automation of responding to the event, taking action, and then notifying back out so that everyone can see what the result was a really great concrete example of the kinds of problems that people are solving with us.
Yeah, no, exactly. And, and that's the thing. I think, to me, when we see sort of the trajectory here, we're really going to see more and more of this, in creative ways, right? In ways that you might not necessarily anticipate, sort of as the core use cases, because as I said, the basic problem here is not terribly complicated. It's that we have a lot more running services than we used to. And, they have to be coordinated and orchestrated in some form or fashion, right? So, any sort of quick comments before we close in terms of, sort of viewer expectation as far as the trajectory here? Clearly there's going to be more of it, but, is it a steep trajectory? Is it taking people longer to get it? Where do you feel we're at?
So I do think that it's, as you said at the beginning, there's, and this reflects something that Luke Kanies used to say all the time about Puppet infrastructure, is that there's no future where things are getting simpler, where there's fewer computers, fewer services running, fewer things that we have to take care of. It's just, that's just not how it works. And so I think it's going to be increasingly important to be able to spread automation, again, as we mentioned, across the organization more broadly, to make it accessible to a wider range of people and to be able to integrate with services that on their own might be difficult to link up with directly and get information into and out of in a easy, repeatable way.
Yeah, totally fair. All right. So with that, we'll wrap. Eric, this has been a real pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks for the time.